Hello and welcome to the last color analysis lesson. This is the fifth lesson in this series, and we hope you enjoyed the previous ones and that gave you a different perspective on color perception. We talked about many things. We discussed color ranges, tonal contrast, memory colors, composition, many different things. We hope you're paying attention to these smaller elements rather than judging the picture as a whole. Now we can say that it's time to fly out of the nest and slowly spread your wings. In this lesson, we will start to twist the colors, bend them and change them. We will deviate from the natural colors we covered so far, because for example, such an overcast can look like this and like this. For example, a visualization in the daytime can look like this and it can look like this. Lots of cool stuff, and this will be a perfect opportunity to say something about Luts, and in fact to do a mega deep dive into Luts. Maybe you've already heard about them, maybe you have used them yourself. Nevertheless, you will get a decent dose of knowledge of what Luts really are and what's their magic and how to use them wisely. Okay then, let's start with the basics. LUT is an abbreviation for lookup table. It's essentially a file on your drive with a LUT, cube or 3DL extension. And a LUT is nothing else than a color grading preset. You can even say it's a filter. You can apply it to an image and it changes the colors. And generally, many different things might happen when you apply a LUT. It can change the tonal ranges, it can change the contrast, behavior of details in blacks and whites. It can shift the colors away from the natural memory colors. Many different things might happen. And if we are a little bit lucky, something cool might happen with the colors. We can end up with a unique and really cool color palette if we apply such a LUT. Well, let's take a look at this example here. We jump into the resolve and we have a video footage here. You can see we have a shot before and after applying some VFX wizardry. Shout out to our good friend Mateusz Klambrowski for sharing these so that we can show some of LUT wizardry as well. So, as we said, LUTs can change colors and apply some additional colors that haven't been there before. They can really do many different things at once. And the best part is that we can get a quick color direction we can explore. Different possibilities we can reflect on. Each of them has something interesting. And by the way, there's a good reason we are showing the LUT behavior on a video footage. So let's have a little story time now. Because originally, LUTs were used only in the film industry. Bear with us, it is an important thing to understand why LUTs were invented in the first place. Now, this is what raw video footage looks like. It looks flat. The colors are washed out and perhaps a little depressing. But despite the fact the shot looks dull on the surface, there is a lot of information inside regarding color. We can take this footage and do whatever we want. The problem was, you could only go crazy after the video was shot. Directors and DOPs were looking at a raw footage on a movie set. So at one point, someone came out with an idea to insert a file into the camera and have some sort of color grade inside the camera. So people on the movie set were finally able to experience their material with some additional color spice. It was a simple idea, but worked miracles. Someone could prepare a LUT and insert such a color preset exactly as I just did, directly on the movie set. And initially, there were just a few presets available and they worked only with corresponding cameras. That's how LUTs were born. Fast forward, people from the photography industry used the same technology. So LUTs overflowed into the photography market. Anyone who possesses a digital camera knows that applying LUTs can very quickly give that extra something to the colors. It can adjust contrast, it can increase saturation, number of operations again. And initially, Those new LUTs were adapted and assigned to the corresponding digital cameras also. Even today, you can download various LUTs from the manufacturer's websites, and over time, LUTs got everywhere. LUTs are no longer assigned to a camera only. We can use LUTs in rendering engines, in Photoshop, and on a photo and on a video footage. Interestingly enough, we usually don't even know if they were created for a camera, photo, or yet for something else. But more on that in a moment. Let's say a few more things regarding the LUTs themselves. We know that a LUT is some kind of color operation. It can be as aggressive and epic as a matrix color grade, but it doesn't have to be at all. LUTs can do a lot of things to an image, but they can literally just change the curve, and there's a good reason for it. Now, this may not be something that you'll directly use in 3ds Max, but we want you to be aware of this as well. LUTs can be divided into certain categories. On one hand, we can have 1D and 3D LUTs, and on the other hand, there can be technical and creative LUTs. So let's briefly discuss what they are. The first category is 1D and 3D LUTs, and the difference between them is quite simple. 1D LUT is a very simple color correction, like this. It's nothing more than a curve correction, exactly what I did here. We can do this kind of S-curve, like so, and if I save this color correction to a file, we would end up with a 1D LUT. You can play with the curve however you want and modify it here and there, but at the end of the day, it will still be a 1D LUT. These LUTs weigh very little. They have little color operations in them. They can basically change the gamut, and they can change the contrast. If you have a package that says 1D, don't generally expect miracles from them. And there are 3D LUTs. They are definitely more advanced. It's not a simple curve correction anymore. It's actually a full color correction or even a color grading. That is, making an image literally into a matrix or whatever you can think of. By the way, we will get to those operations later on, but for now, you can see that 3D LUTs can turn colors upside down. They will weigh a bit more, but at the same time, definitely give more interesting effects. So that's the first category. 1D and 3D, meaning simple and more advanced. Pretty straightforward. And the second type of category is technical and creative LUTs. And again, it might not be the most important stuff from a 3D artist's perspective, but again, we want you to be aware of them. We are doing a little demystifying of these LUTs so that you know what it goes with. So technical LUTs are used primarily in film cameras. They help to transition between a flat color profile to something our eyes are more familiar with. They go from log color profile to rec, to be more exact here. The colors look more natural then, and that's what the technical LUTs do. A base color correction that's very much needed to adjust the camera footage properly. On the other hand, we have creative LUTs, and they rarely have anything to do with natural colors. They are not color corrections, but color grading presets. Creative LUTs can emulate the Matrix, Mad Max look, anything really. Basically anything we want. As wild color correction as you can only imagine. So the second category is technical and creative LUTs, which correspond more or less to color correction and color grading. And there's a reason we use the words color correction and color grading. It's essential to understand the difference between those two concepts if we want to understand how LUTs work. And now, color correction is pretty much what we learned in the previous 4 color analysis. It's to make our renders reflect what our eyes see in the real world. Color correction is making sure that our image has no loss of details in the right places, to set the right contrast, tonal ranges, and white balance so that everything seems natural. Color correction is a skill that every artist should have. It's a technical aspect of color in a very big way. This is color correction. Color grading, on the other hand, is kind of an advanced color correction, something that adds more than naturalism or realism. Through the right choice of colors, we are even able to evoke emotions, both positive and negative. In color grading, we think about color differently. We can ignore memory colors, and we can think differently about details in blacks and whites. We can really do a lot, as long as our image is pleasant to look at. Of course, color grading also follows certain rules, but this topic is a material for a separate training course. For now, we would like you to stay with the idea that there is a color correction and there is a color grading. There are natural colors and stylized ones, and somewhere there has to be a line between the two. And as you have already guessed, Luts will cross that boundary at 80 to 90% of the time. Keeping that in mind, let's get back to Luts. We have a few words to speak about them before we go into the action. The Luts are made by professional colorists, especially the better ones. Such a colorist, that is, a person who color grades films, commercials, or whatever, works on high-quality monitors in a proper studio. He has extensive knowledge of colors and knows and understands which colors can be manipulated. He knows when colors look natural and when they start to look stylized. And when creating a lot, the colorist has 100% color control over them. But you need to keep in mind that whatever he does, it won't work for every video possible. You can't make a universal color grade that works for everything. You will approach a desert with dusty orange-green skies differently than a vivid forest. Luts, as good as they might be, won't work 100% of the time. They need similar footage that the colorist had while creating them. So now, the 100-point question. If you have some rendering experience under your belt and bought a few Lut packages, let me know how many times you applied a Lut and it worked perfectly from the get-go. How many times have you picked something from the list at 100% and it looked great with absolutely no problem? Well, this has almost never happened to me. Usually, it just looks like this. I scroll down the list, I look at something, and if something interests me, I drop the opacity down to about 20 or 30% tops. It's usually the case for me. And that's not a coincidence. If you think about all the things we discussed so far, most Luts are made to work with film cameras or digital cameras. It's very much possible that such a Lut just expects film footage in the input. If what we are rendering deviates from what a Lut expects on input, it probably won't work very well. And now the question is, what does it mean to work well? Because generally it will change the colors. But yeah, we might like some of what it does and some of it not so much. That's why we go with the opacity until there's the sweet spot somewhere when it looks more sensible. And don't get us wrong, there's nothing wrong with being inspired by Luts, that we are looking for something interesting and land on even 5% eventually. The Luts are such a box of chocolates that magically changes colors and you never know what will happen to you. But as we have done so far, we want to have total control over colors. We want to know when we cross the line between color correction and color grading, between those natural colors and those stylized ones. And if you set Luts at 10 or 20%, as we did here, why can't you do these operations yourself? Why should you give control to the box of chocolates? So far, absolutely everything has been under our control. So, to end this long discussion about Luts, we go to the heart of this lesson. We will inspire you to start what Luts do. We'll tell you where to start a new journey with colors so that you don't have to be held hostage by Luts. Even though color grading is really a huge topic in itself, we want to give you some way to analyze what these Luts are doing, and we'll give you some tools to replicate it. Okay, so let's move on to the more practical part. We're going to demystify these lots a little bit more once and for all, and we are going to use the language we have already used during this training. Just as we learned to look at the image in black and white, we will start analyzing our lots the same now. Okay, let me remove those button lots so that we can play a little bit with the standard Corona lots. You can scroll through them and see what happens. They will certainly look better in terms of their overall behavior. They were created by the Corona developers, so they certainly know better what kind of material is expected for the input. And as I said, we'll be analyzing the image in black and white, so as we did before, we will apply a black and white lot at the top, the same we used before. Remember, we do not desaturate the image to -1, although this might be tempting. A proper look at the values. We want to have it like so, and now we can see how our image behaves. Now, in general, lots affect values, that's kind of obvious. Maybe we'll fire up our histogram to investigate it more accurately. In the first color analysis lesson, we talked about values, that we have to be careful with these lower and upper regions, that we don't want to lose any detail here. And we can already see that most of these lots don't give a damn about it. We can see that these blacks are pressed against the left edge of the histogram. We see that our sky is very, very bright here. Lots really interfere with values and the curve adjustment. And now, getting back to our initial argument, let's see if we can recreate what they do. Let's say we can go for this one. If we have any lot working on any amount of opacity, we can first try to recreate what it does in black and white. Maybe what charm does in the first place was some kind of more aggressive contrast. If that's the case, let's try to reproduce it. We can see what this lot did here. We can see that it dragged these blacks to the left and the whites were dragged to the right. We can see that we have this mid-range pushed a little bit more. We can see that they landed somewhere here. They have been shifted. So okay, let's try to replicate that now. I'm going to add another curve and try to eyeball it somewhere. So what I wanted was to drag this down. I wanted to drag this up quite a bit. That also went up, and mid-range all went up. Maybe even go that much. Very quick and raw adjustment, but let us see if we were able to match it. And for my taste, it looks pretty close. We can see that both color corrections look almost identical. We'll get to color in a moment, but as you remember, tonal contrast is where most of the action really takes place. This is worth paying attention to. It's worth looking at how the image behaves in those lower and upper areas. Sometimes what might seem tempting is just a little stronger punch in those areas. And that's why you can do it with a curve. You can try to get rid of one aspect that lot does. Add the curve operator and gain 100% control over colors back. It's a great exercise to train your eye to understand tonal contrast as well. Let's remove the black and white operator here and compare what we achieved with the curve only. And as you can see, it's more punchy. We replicated this part fairly easily. We hope you like where this is going and it makes some sense. So let's push the mystifying lots even further. Okay, let's put the black and white operator on again. I'll turn off our curve for now. So there we have it, how our initial lot influenced the image. And now we want to give you a second aspect to pay attention to with Luts. It is the so-called undertoning. This is a new idea we haven't talked about yet. Another aspect that you can analyze in your own and other people's works. You can think of such an undertoning as a layer of color that floods the colors in your image in a certain way. They are not the result of any lighting conditions or artificial lighting. And this may sound a bit enigmatic, but an extreme case of undertoning could be a matrix look, which is totally green. All this green color was poured in the stage of color grading. You could say that this is another layer of colors that hasn't been there before, and undertoning does not have to be so invasive at all. On the contrary, it can be very, very subtle, but to the skilled eye can be immediately noticeable. Some images may have a cold color cast, some orange, greenish, or whatever. At this point, keep in mind that some images might have some additional layer of colors that may have nothing to do with the lighting conditions inside them. Look at this example. It's quite interesting. Here we have some images executed in a sunset scenario, maybe even a daytime scenario. We remember that we can expect the colors to shift toward orange in this scenario. We can ignore the memory colors a bit, but at this point, I would say we enter a very subtle color grading, or more precisely, this concept of undertoning. No longer do we have blue skies, and no longer do we have these kinds of greenish, yellowish greenery. Under natural colors, we have another layer of oranges, yellows, and perhaps some greens, and it works really, really nicely. This undertoning makes an impression of heat, that everything is so warm that it is pretty hot and dry. We can see that these highlights and shadows are flooded with warmth. You wouldn't necessarily get this kind of color palette if you just go there and shoot a photo yourself, right? Undertoning is a concept that lets you quickly decide if the colors inside your image make sense or not. Let's keep that in mind and get back to our CXR. We will show you exactly how Luts are pouring in those colors. See, at the moment, we have our black and white LUT at the very top. If we reset it, we'll have our colors back, but we can change them in order. So black and white will be applied first, and see what happens when we apply this now. And bam! We see that suddenly we have additional color introduced here, and that's the undertone. It's affecting blacks, whites. We can see that mid-ranges have some additional color poured in as well. These colors were not there before, and this LUT has added these colors. And what's interesting here is that we can also reproduce this effect. I will go into Curve and produce it. So here we have our LUT. We have our previous curve correction as well, so we can start to add this undertoning layer. There is some yellow there and a little bit of green. I'll try to reproduce that. Now, there was some yellow here, so that means I have to subtract a little bit of blue. This way. Well, maybe I'll add a little green too. I'll also add red. And let's see now. Bam. Well, it's not perfect, but I think it's very, very close. Let's see now how this image looks with LUTs and how it looks with our curve. And it seems that it's very, very close to me. We can subtract a little bit of that yellow in the highlights, but I also kind of like it. I can subtract a little bit here. And interestingly enough, it was super easy again. You might think adjusting curves is very hard, but it's not really. I'll show you how to do it later in Photoshop, so don't worry. The most important part is that we have everything under control again. No random colors coming from the LUT. Well, that for the time being may seem to be painfully simple, and to some extent it is. After all, we wanted to do a little bit of demystifying Luts, and we hope you already believe a little bit less in their magic. If you have to add 20% Lut to the image, then try to do them on yourself. Try pouring those greens, those reds. Try fixing that curve in the black and white image. And rest assured, we'll still share how to modify that curve well and create more interesting gradients in small steps. We need to give some kind of credit to Luts, right? We need to give honor back to Luts. We need to give them honor, because not everything in Luts comes down to curves and undertoning. As we have mentioned, Luts are often an advanced color correction, and it is done by specialists. The more we want to modify this curve, the harder it is to catch a good tonal contrast. The more color we want to pour or twist, the harder it is to control the whole image again. Colorists know how to adjust those curves and tones. Even if the images have very narrow tonal ranges, they also have tools, for example in Resolve, to work more precisely with these colors, to combine them and create unique color trends like in Joker, Batman, or whatever. Really unique color palettes. And professional colorists do one more thing you might have a hard time nailing down. Either way, we will also try to do it, so don't be scared that much. We will introduce one last color concept. It will be color isolation. This is the last new concept in all our color analysis. Color isolation. We have talked about isolating colors before, but never really from such a broader angle. Color isolation, as the name suggests, is about protecting certain colors from aggressive color correction, so as they stay as they are and just look good. I'll give you an example here. How would you go about pouring in a lot of green color into an image, but not flooding people's faces with that color? A green background like in the Matrix can look epic, but if the face is flooded with green, it will look unhealthy very quickly. Certain colors will have to be closer to what we expect as natural colors. They should be isolated and kept intact. We can see this here. We have a frame from the movie Joker. We can see that in general, this frame has a very narrow tonal ranges. The blacks are raised a bit, and the whites land at about 60 or 70%. And there is so much undertoning of green here. There is an outpouring of green in this picture. It plays nicely with these oranges. It's a well-isolated split color palette, which we covered last time. However, when it comes to isolation itself, we can see that this skin looks very, very natural. This skin doesn't look unhealthy or sickly. It's stylized to some extent, but it still reads as natural. See another example here. We have another frame from Joker. And again, the skin of all these people look very natural. By the way, this is also a very popular look, this teal and orange. We have many versions of teal and orange in various lot packs, but anyway, in all likelihood, these were ordinary gray lamps and this blue color was added later by colorists. We can see that these hues were isolated, and other than that, we have an obvious cold undertone everywhere. And it may seem like black magic, how to add this color and isolate it in certain places, but we'll get into that in a moment. For now, stay with the idea that certain colors cannot be distorted that much by aggressive color correction. Of course, it can all be managed, and it takes some skill, but it doesn't have to be so overwhelming at all. Okay, that's all the concepts for now. We've got black and white image analysis, we've got undertoning, we've got isolations. Now we're going to show you some grading tricks that will help you create Luts from scratch. We have a scenario that we will be creating in the next lesson, the so-called grand finale, the end of the season, let's say. Anyway, this will be our final output, and I have prepared a lot here. Let's see what it looks like. And isn't that nice? We can see that a few aspects are modified. What is obvious is the blue undertone. There's also an interesting thing as you look at it closely. These blacks have been raised a tad. We can see that we lose a little bit of detail here. Something is going on here. And the last thing is that we isolated that yellow color. Okay, so let's try to do it from scratch. Let's introduce a few tricks that you can use to color grade and create LUTs yourself. And for starters, it's pretty simple. We need to save our image to AXR or PNG, of course without the LUT, and then jump into Photoshop. We open the image, and before we start playing with color, we need to keep in mind two things. One is not to do anything with the background layer. It should be called exactly as it is, and it should be locked. That's how it has to stay in order to generate lights correctly later on, so we don't tinker with anything here. And the other thing is to change the color space to 16 bits. We go here and choose 16 bits. Collapse all of that, and now we can start creating LUTs. And as we have done so far, as in basically every color analysis, you should expect that we are putting a black and white adjustment layer first. We will start analyzing our values. We have always done this, and we will do it again here. So let's discuss what LUTs commonly change with our values. We can keep an eye on our histogram while doing it. And the only adjustment we are going to use here is the curve adjustment. Nothing extraordinary here. We did it before, We can play with the brightness. We can play with the curves in many ways. We can add points and have more funky curves. You don't have to be afraid of that at all. It can be something weird. As long as it works, it's okay. You can really do whatever you want here. So let's remove those points. And it's basically nothing else than adjusting tonal contrast. That's what LUTs very often change. So you can do the same yourself. There's no big philosophy here. But what's interesting about the curves is the moment you cross the line between color correction and color grade. That's the moment you start tinkering with those blacks and whites. You can go both ways here. You can lift those blacks and then they appear a little bit muddy. You can also cut down on that detail. You can add more contrast. You can drag these colors more to the left side of the histogram. You can increase or decrease the peak of blacks. And you can do exactly the same with the whites. You can whisk them a little bit and you can make them super dynamic here. See how the histogram behaves when we drag them to the right side. We can make them more dynamic. And this kind of curve adjustment, such as clamping here, has a good justification. Well, we associate this look strongly with old photographs, when we generally have blacks raised to the top or whites brought down. Back in the day, to develop a photo, we needed to go to a darkroom and use different chemicals on a light-sensitive films. And depending on what kind of chemical we use, we might end up with a different look. We had these photos like, sepia, which generally have the blacks slightly raised. The whites also have been lowered if you look back at it. So that's why it doesn't feel that artificial to us. We are used to this look. I'll still adjust that curve for my LUT, so I like it even more. I think I like that the tonal ranges have gotten a little bit smaller and a little bit more painterly. We raised the mid-range and raised the blacks. I like it. Here you can really do whatever you want. You can lower the blacks, you can lower the whites, you can raise them at will. Check on the references and how they behave. You can also sample these colors and look at the histogram of where they start and where they end. We are able to freely change the values here, and well, When it comes to black and whites, it's basically everything. These operations, even slightly raising that peak of blacks, would add a very nice touch. And this is the kind of things that Luts do very often. So let's go into another aspect that we introduced today, and that is the undertoning, which is how we pour colors into the image. Those colors that generally weren't there before. And we will have several ways of doing an undertoning. We are going to do it in 3 different ways. Let's start with the first one that we did in the frame buffer before. In general, you can add or subtract colors to the appropriate areas. For example, if we want to add red, we go into the red channel and add red. If, for example, we would like to add yellow, we need to subtract blue. And if you don't know how curves work in general, how they work on channels, maybe let's make a little digression here. There's a pretty cool way to add colors through separate channels so that they come out exactly the way we want. And we'll need a color wheel for that. If you don't have one, we usually have a hue cube here, so you can go to the color wheel and always keep it on the side. It will very much help us introduce colors using each channel separately. So yes, regarding this yellow, how did I know that by subtracting the blue, I would get yellow? We can see that on this color wheel, we have the RGB colors, and on the opposite sides, we have the corresponding CMY, RGB, and CMYK in general. The opposite of blue is yellow, green is magenta, and red is cyan. That is, if we want to add yellow, we have to subtract blue. But there's a limitation to adding colors through one channel only. Every color has 3 components, especially the more saturated ones, and we also have to adjust them accordingly. Well, and now, as yellow is ideally between green and red, we need to add a little green and the same amount for red. I need to add some red. Let's assume this much. And now I need to add the same amount for green. And voila, we have our yellow color. We can start with that base color, the one that we are sure is the closest, and then follow with the other channels. Let's do another example because it's really not that difficult. For example, what if I would like to add pink now? Pink is the closest to magenta, which means we should subtract green at first. See, as we start subtracting green, we start having some magentas. But if we want to say add pink, now pink is closer to blue than it is to red. So that means we need to add more blue this time, and we need to add just a little bit of red. And as you can see, we have added color very quickly, very deliberately, the color we want. This works with any colors on the color wheel. If we want to add this color, we start with red, then add more blue and less green. Any color can be broken down into these 3 and you can pour it into your image very easily. For example, the operation that Luts often do is adding this kind of teal color, which is more or less somewhere here. And let's make it very quickly. Let's subtract a little red and add a little blue and a hint of green. And we have this very cool teal, which is very often added in Luts. You can put it in here. No problem. It's very, very simple. It works quite nicely and you can use it at will. You can use it in the frame buffer as well. However, the situation with curves is that they can be quite hard to control. Since the curve window is quite small, we may not have as much precision as we would like to. And sometimes these colors can spill out where we don't necessarily want them to. That's why I'm going to remove the curves for now and show two other ways how to introduce color, which Luts do very often. The first way is to use the color balance. And here the situation is very simple again. We can pour color in. We can change the color balance relative to the appropriate ranges. We can add to shadows, we can add to midtones, and to highlights. We can, for example, add a little blue to these shadows here. Maybe more of that here. Like so. You can switch between preserve luminosity. Usually with this operation, it's generally worth turning it off here so that it doesn't interfere with the values so much. You can play with colors and look at references at the same time. You're trying to add some color that looks attractive. What kind of color it is? That's not what this lesson is about. It's a whole different story. But we just want to point out that this is a good tool to just technically do it. Maybe we can still add a little yellow in highlights so that this image doesn't suddenly become so monochromatic. I think like this, it's pretty cool. Well, we poured this color without any problem. I won't remove this operation for now because I'll use it later, but I'll show you one more operation which you can add this undertoning. This can be done with selective color as well. And here we can expand the list and we can choose whether we want to go into the dark regions again, into the middle or whites. And the situation is almost the same, slightly different interface, as one prefers. We can pour this color here very efficiently. We can see that the result is practically identical. So I often like to use this, but there is more than one way, so we can do it the way we prefer. So okay, that's where the technical application of undertoning ends. We can now remove our black and white, and let's see what kind of look we are already landed with. You can see that we have separately prepared the curve, we have separately adjusted the color balance, and it's already starting to really go in a cool direction. Values changed and undertoning was added. So now, naturally, let's move on to the color isolation. And there are two ways of color isolation. You can also use them at will. And the first will also be the selective color here. You can select by color which regions you want to affect. In our case, there are not too many of these colors in the image, but whatever the image is, you can start tinkering with it here. You can see how this image behaves. You can see that there's not too much difference now, but yeah, maybe I will reset it. One thing we can do here is a little bit of a nuance, but we can do such a trick that we generally compress these greens more toward the blue colors. This is such a micro treatment here. They now don't screen so much, so such a nuance stack up, and over time you'll start noticing them, but yeah, just food for thought with this one. You can isolate the colors using selective tool, and it may not have been the perfect solution in this case, but it's a great tool overall. And if you have a similar case as we do, you can isolate colors in a better way with hue and saturation adjustment. It's the second way of color isolation. Here again, we can choose our own regions, and this correction will work much more aggressively here. We can see how these colors change here. For our case, it is possible that we will add a little bit of saturation. We can see that it already affects these ranges a little bit different here. And we can see that we have made them pop. If we want to further increase this effect, we can duplicate this layer. We can do something like this, and we can isolate these colors. Perhaps we can even shift them a little bit. One thing to remember is that we cannot overdo it. If we go too far with this color, it will make such an artifact in the image, and we don't want that. So yes, generally within reason, we can isolate and control these colors. So let's sum it up one by one. We have our value curve, then put in the color, then we have targeted operations here, color isolation. We isolated our yellows. So there are a couple of tricks that Luts do when we cross these natural colors and go into grading. And even though it seems simple, you can really do a lot of things with those tools. And obviously, we encourage you to figure out different ways of playing with colors, keeping in mind the basic concepts we introduced today. Now, if you really want to, you can also add as many operations as you like at the top of it. You can still modify this curve for yourself if you still feel like it. However, this whole workflow helps you to do it so simply in small steps. You have the tools. Try to use them. This is not a lesson where we want to sort of teach you how to do this from scratch, but we want to point out that these tools will get you there. Just as usual, look at references, get out of your comfort zone, and experiment with color. We'll show you a cool source of inspiration in a moment, but we want to finish our lot first. Let's export this lot and load it in the Corona frame buffer. So what we need to do is export the color lookup table. The default options here are OK, so just click OK. Let's name it VDB new. Fantastic. And now let's see if it works. We'll load our lot. And bam, again. I think it's very similar. There are minimal differences, and the beautiful part about it is that you exactly know how we got here. Very simple operations. Okay, we are bringing this lesson home. You know how to create LUTs. You know how to add colors. You know that there are different types of LUTs. You know that you can have total control in your own hands. And by the way, you can generate these LUTs for an ordinary commercial job as well. You can open a datum scenario, make some additional color correction, increase the saturation or greens or whatever, and generate such LUT too. You don't need an undertoning or stylized operation to use these LUTs because it's a color preset after all, right? We have taken these LUTs apart. We have introduced this color concept of undertoning and color isolation, and we hope that they are not such a mystery anymore. Now, maybe as a cherry on top of the cake, we'll share one cool website that can get you very much inspired by color. You can be inspired by different looks, and we are not affiliated with this site by any means. It's just cool. This is a site where we can generally see still frames from popular movies. We can go here and type in whatever we want. We can go to, for example, the Joker, and we can browse through different frames. And we can see how there is this green undertoning everywhere. But the jacket is well isolated. These whites are isolated to some extent as well. We can see a red undertoning here. Blacks are lifted a little bit. We can notice in comparison to this absolute black here. And there is even this kind of blue color poured in a little bit. We can analyze it for ourselves. Maybe we can check matrix. We have already talked so much about it. See that, for example, you can immediately see that there's a green in the whites, but the skin color is super isolated. You can be inspired by the film. You can pay attention to these different aspects. You can spend some time thinking about concepts you already know and taking wisdom from these shots. And a small digression here, if you really like to work with color, then we recommend educating yourself towards being a colorist. If you vibe with color more than 3D itself, well, you can consider such a career. You can learn Resolve, and we have shown it a bit here and there in our training. There are plenty of tutorials regarding Resolve on YouTube. Even if you were just to try it, chances are it will inspire you to get out of the Photoshop mindset and look at color differently. Okay, we hope you enjoy our color analysis. We hope you can analyze works on such a deeper level, but still talk about them objectively. At the very end, we want to encourage you once again to explore color, to understand how to set the color tonal contrast. A deep understanding of tonal contrast really requires dozens of tests performed, so it's fun to experiment with different scenarios to be ready for different tonal contrast. We encourage you to keep in mind the idea of memory colors so that you know when green looks natural, when the sky starts to look artificial, and when you have mastered all those natural looks, well, that's when you're truly ready and mature to break those rules and get into real grading. Feed yourself with tons of references, grow in working with color and experiment with it. And we wish you a successful color journey. Don't worry, we'll see you again in the next practical lesson. Cheers!